New Brunswick Premier Susan Holt joins me now. Nice to see you, Premier. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, JP.
So President Trump is hitting back at Canada again over these failed trade negotiations today, threatening to impose a 50% tariff on Canadian cars and auto parts effective January 1st. Of course, that's up from the current 25%. And he says Canada is ripping off the United States and the Americans don't need anything from our country. What do you say to the president?
Well, I think the president has grossly underestimated the impact of Canadian products on the American economy and how our two countries have been integrated. We provide them with serious amounts of energy products. Certainly here in New Brunswick, we provide them with the wood that they use to build their homes. We process their lobsters. We provide them with blueberries and electricity and gas for their cars and for their fighter jets. And I think he'll learn very quickly that the U.S. really needs Canada.
Do you think the Prime Minister made the right call to walk away from the negotiating table on Friday? You know, a deal was coming together, one that could have delivered some tariff relief for hard-hit sectors in this country, including lumber. And I know that's very important for New Brunswick. Now we're facing potentially even higher tariffs for longer. Do you think it was the right call to step back and call these talks off?
I do. New Brunswickers were clear with us that they didn't want to see the kind of compromises made that the U.S. was looking for in the end, because questions about who we trade with in Canada are our decisions and our decisions alone. Questions about our language and our culture and our identity, things that New Brunswickers hold very dear. Those aren't things you negotiate with at a table. We're looking for a partner that respects the value of the kind of products that we produce in New Brunswick, and natural resources, as you mentioned, in the forestry sector, that's one. And so it wasn't about getting a deal at all costs. It was about getting the best deal possible for New Brunswickers, and what the U.S. was offering wasn't it.
You heard directly from the Prime Minister on Saturday. You had that First Minister's meeting after the talks fell apart. Can you kind of peel back the curtain for us and give us some insight into how the Prime Minister was in that conversation? How did he seem to you? What did he say? How was he feeling after such a monumental decision, really, to take a step back?
Well, I think we're all feeling a bit of the same thing, right? There was a sense that we were close to what looked like a good deal in the middle of the week. And I think we had some almost surprise that we were there. We were all a little surprised that we had reached a point that looked like a deal we could all get behind. And then maybe no surprise that we're back to our usual frustration with this president, who has been threatening tariffs for nearly 2 years now, since he first came into office, and sometimes put them on and sometimes not, and then changed the plan. I think the Prime Minister said it well when he said they sign agreements in pencil. It's like negotiating on quickstand. So the fact that they threw in untenable elements to negotiation at the very 11th hour, I think was frustrating for everybody.
The Prime Minister also said that Canada is effectively at war with the United States, right? We're at least an economic war because of these economic broadsides the president has launched against us, trying to cripple some of our critical industries. Do you think Mark Carney was right to say what we're going through is akin to war? That's a pretty strong statement.
Well, I would say we've been in a trade war with the U.S. now for a number of months. They have been hitting us with tariffs on our steel, on our auto, on our softwood lumber, on a whole variety of products that Canadians make and that Americans rely upon. They've been hitting us in a way that is unjustified and, in past cases, illegal. And so we have to go to battle for our province, for our country. And thankfully, we're doing it with a lot of allies, because countries around the world have shown that New Brunswick has what the world wants, Canada has what the world wants, the critical minerals, the agricultural products, the energy products that the world is looking for. And with the kind of allies that we have at our sides and the new trade relationships that we're building, I think that we are well positioned for this fight.
Canada is preparing dollar for dollar tariffs, right, to hit back at what you call unjustified tariffs. I think a lot of folks in this country would call it unjustified. And Premier Ford has also floated perhaps another creative solution to this, and that's hitting some American goods that come from politically sensitive parts of the U.S. With the midterms there looming, I think they're just 10 weeks away. New Brunswick, of course, borders Maine, which is a swing state. They have a Senate race underway now. Do you think that Canada should target Maine? Is that an effective way to send a message?
Well, we have been looking for those points of vulnerability with the U.S. for the last year and a half. We might remember the first time we had this conversation as Canada was planning out retaliatory tariffs against the first threat and doing exactly that, figuring out what are the things that they hold near and dear, what are the places where we can apply leverage, whether to a particular senator or congressperson or governor that we thought would have influence or impact with this president, which is why we did things like take U.S. alcohol off the shelf here in New Brunswick that has proven to be a significant irritant for the Americans and something that got us back to the negotiating table. So look, here in New Brunswick, we love our neighbors in Maine. They're like family to us. We're very integrated with the people of Maine and our economies. In fact, there's a pipe that runs between where you were recently, Edmundston and Madawaska, over to the Madawaska Maine side, where a company literally has operations on both sides of the border, moving pulp through that pipe. And so we are looking for every tool and every path to getting back to the free and fair trade and the good neighborly relationships that we've had with the U.S. over generations. And so I hope the good people of Maine don't become a pawn in this chess game. But at the end of the day, my job is to look after New Brunswickers and Canadians, and we'll do what it takes.
U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance was actually in Brewer, Maine today, and he was asked by local press about this, as you might imagine, because it is such a significant issue for that state, given how much cross-border trade there is. And he said that, I'll put this to you, he says that Canada treats Chinese goods more fairly than goods from Maine. If I'm being charitable, and I'm really not in a charitable mood, but if I'm being charitable, that is what seems to me like a gross misrepresentation of what actually happens in terms of cross-border trade between New Brunswick and Maine, for example. How do you fight back against this narrative that is being pushed by the Trump administration? They are floating ideas that are, frankly, nowhere close to reality.
Well, that's the nub of it, JP. How do you fight back against an institution and a presidency that is nowhere close to reality when they're using misinformation and a misrepresentation of the facts and the relationship? Look, the people of Maine and the people of New Brunswick, there is an event every year where between St. Stephen and Calais, they walk to the middle of the bridge with flags and cake to celebrate the relationship together. And we exchange and do a lot of different things. We have an island, Campobello, that is literally has a bridge to the U.S. and a boat to New Brunswick, and we all live in harmony and share services and supports for each other. And what this president is doing to the long-standing relationship between Canada and the U.S. is not based in reality at all. And so how do you negotiate in that environment? I think you do what the Prime Minister has been doing and what New Brunswick has been doing. You go out into the world, you find your allies and your friends, and you build up your independence and your sovereignty so that we are in a better position to live without a dependence and ties to the U.S. than we were yesterday.
New Brunswick, I think, is the most trade-exposed province in Confederation, if I have my facts right. And, all of this tariff uncertainty, of course, it's a nightmare for business to navigate, right? They have to deal with tariffs, the retaliatory tariffs, higher tariff rates, who knows what's coming. What exactly do you need from Ottawa to help prop up some of the industries that will be suffering as a result of this trade war, especially now that it seems to be escalating?
Yeah, that's a great question because you've nailed it, JP. Businesses need certainty, and they haven't had much certainty with this U.S. president over the last nearly 2 years. So they need to know the rules today are the rules tomorrow, and they're looking to our province, our provincial government, and the feds for support. So the sooner we can get clarity on what that $25 billion of support looks like, the better. The sooner we can be specific about what the retaliatory tariffs look like and where they'll be applied, the better. And then our team is ready to be flexible and to provide the right supports at the right time to help our businesses get through this, because there are going to be a number of New Brunswick businesses impacted. There is a risk to a number of workers in the U.S. We've had estimates anywhere between 500 and 1,600 jobs impacted. And so we're going to be there, and the feds have committed to being there. I think businesses need clarity on what that looks like and how they can access it as we move to this next stage in this trade war.
Well, let's leave it there. Susan Holt, Premier of New Brunswick, nice to see you. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks very much, JP.
Prime Minister Mark Carney has said he would be willing to return to the negotiating table with the United States once they have the right attitude. Carney said talks broke down when the U.S. began asking for too much, including demands that would have affected Canada's ability to protect its culture and the French language.
For the Americans, questions around the French language or the Quebec culture, the Francophone culture, the Canadian culture, these are irritants. But here in Quebec, here in Canada, these are rights. These are fundamental rights.
Christopher Skeete is Quebec's Minister of International Relations, and he joins me now. Nice to see you, Minister. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So Canada is going to hit back at the U.S. with dollar-for-dollar tariffs. The Prime Minister said today that Ottawa is drawing up the list of goods that will be affected with the provinces. Which American products in particular should be targeted, Minister? What does Quebec want to see on the list of goods facing retaliatory tariffs?
Well, right now we're subject to a lot of tariffs in the aluminum sector and derivatives from there. So, of course, what we're doing right now is we're consolidating our ecosystem. We've met with them on a couple of occasions, and right now with the Minister for the Economy, they're drawing up the exact HS codes that are going to be the most impactful. From our perspective, we don't want a dollar for dollar or a tit for tat necessarily. What we want is targeted measures to make sure we don't harm ourselves in the process of trying to respond to the U.S. So that list is still being drawn up as we speak.
The Prime Minister said today that these countermeasures are not necessarily designed to hurt the Americans per se, but as what you're saying, kind of level the playing field, help Canadian businesses that are now facing much higher tariffs thanks to what Trump has done over the last few days. Having heard that, though, would you like to see Canada target Republican states, goods that are coming from the so-called red states, to send not only an economic message, but a political one as well?
Well, you know, as Minister for International Relations, I've been to a lot of these red states. A lot of them signed declarations of friendship with Quebec. And so, you know, we really have to distinguish between the executive branch, the president's office, and Americans in general. I would be reluctant to target Americans because I don't think that they're in full control of what their president is doing. And I would want to mostly send a message and especially protect our economy. I think our priority with this retaliation should be protecting Canadian workers, Quebec workers, and also our ecosystems and our sectors that are really being targeted by these tariffs. So I'm not really into the revenge mantra. I really just want to protect our industries.
Ontario Premier Doug Ford is into the revenge mantra, if you will, and he has floated withholding Canadian energy products from the U.S. market. He says maybe we should be thinking about cutting off electricity exports to the States, withholding critical minerals. Do you think that's the right approach? Is it a step too far? I mean, many Canadians support, frankly, a more aggressive approach to this American hostility.
We have a lot of tools in our toolbox, and so, you know, we should explore every single option that we have. But as I said, my priority is not so much to get into the emotional debate that's going on right now. I think we need to be very deliberate in the actions that we pose. Is it helping our industries? Is it helping our workers? Are we protecting our economy? Is it helping us diversify our economy faster? These are the type of lucid questions we need to be asking ourselves, and we should try to avoid getting into the mud with the president. In the end, we export a lot to the United States, and the worst thing that we can do is make steps that amplify the problem that we're in right now. And so I'd be about protecting our economy and our workers. That should be our focus all the time.
President Trump is lashing out in very personal terms, saying today that Mark Carney is a governor, Doug Ford is a flunky, he's less charismatic, less intelligent than his late brother, Rob Ford. You know, Ford in turn is calling Trump a loser, he's the king of bankruptcies. Are you worried about this kind of rhetoric? It does seem like things are getting pretty ugly.
That's not the Quebec style. The Quebec style is to be pragmatic and offer stability at a time when stability is really in high demand. We want to be a reliable partner, and so I don't think this helps anybody, and I don't think you win by trying to outshout Donald Trump. I think it's a strategy that is probably not a winner. I would suggest we focus on what Canadians and what Quebecers want us to focus on. They want us to protect their jobs. They want us to make sure that we have markets for their products, and especially want us to contribute every day to make sure that we protect our wallets in this world that's becoming increasingly unstable. And so Quebec's international philosophy has always been to be a reliable, predictable, pragmatic partner.
The Prime Minister said one reason why he walked away from these talks with the Americans is because the U.S. was intent on changing parts of the deal, as he said, that related to the French language. The Americans took issue with, taking some funds from the U.S. tech giants to give to cultural programming. The Prime Minister seemed quite outraged by this sort of interference. How are you feeling knowing that French is caught up in these talks?
Well, from our perspective, it was a red line from the Premier's perspective. Premier Fichette said very clearly that supply management was a red line and culture and language was a red line. I'm happy that the federal government really stood tall on those issues. But one question I would ask your listeners, because I know some people might not agree with that positioning, is culture a product like any other? Is it a consumable like a vehicle is? I don't think that our culture is a consumable, and it shouldn't be treated like the way we treat any other good. And so from my perspective, I think what we have in Canada, what we have in Quebec is special, and we certainly don't want to be homogenized or assimilated to American culture, which is fine for them. But I think we want to protect what makes us different, and I think that to stand on that principle is an important stance, and I think it's going to serve us well in the future.
Your Premier says many companies are essentially in survival mode right now. Given that there are these tariffs coming in, perhaps they could go higher if we're to believe the president's threats. Do you have any regrets about the Prime Minister's decision to walk away from the negotiating table, given that, it wasn't a perfect deal? Obviously, we were talking about the French language issue. There are certainly some sovereignty issues at play here, but it would have delivered some relief for some of those hard-hit sectors.
For now. I mean, so essentially what the Americans were asking us was, hey, create a North American perimeter and block all outside goods while applying my tariffs to your friends with whom you have trade agreements. Oh, and by the way, I'm still going to charge you a tariff to access my market. That seems like a lose-lose in the medium term. But yeah, I would have offered predictability for the short term, but I'm not sure how starving our industries, ruining our international reputation, and reneging on a lot of our policies internationally is a win in the long term. So I think we have to be very deliberate about the actions that we take now, and especially not be too emotional about these issues that occupy us, which can be kind of scary. And so we have to be deliberate. We have to be very circumspect about how we do things and make sure that we do them for the right reason. So I would support what we did, because a lot of what was being asked was not stuff that we were willing to give up.
What's interesting about the president's latest threat today, he's saying he's going to put 50% tariffs on Canadian autos, auto parts, which would be a new addition to the tariff list. What's interesting about this latest threat is that he says that will come into effect on January 1st, 2027. That's still a relatively long way away, right? What does that tell you? He's not necessarily slapping more tariffs on us today. Does that signal that there maybe is an opening to get back to the table with Mr. Trump?
My interpretation of what's going on in American media today is that there's a lot of backlash and a lot of disappointment that Donald Trump wasn't able to sign a deal with Canada. I think there's a lot of people in the United States that just don't understand how you can be the only country in the world that doesn't get along with Canada. And I think that speaks volumes about his positioning. And so my hope is that by putting a deadline in January, he's trying to have us at the table. And you know what? I think it's a good thing if we're talking and if we can move on these issues. But I think he understands now that there are some issues that we're just not going to be flexible on. And I think that's also a good thing. So let's try to make a deal for what it's worth. And we should try to get the predictability that our ecosystems and the economy are looking for. And if that protects our workers and our people and our entrepreneurs, I think we should try to look at it.
Well, let's see what there. Christopher Skeete, Quebec's Minister of International Relations. Nice to see you, sir. Thanks for coming on.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.